Roger, Roger in calling in says, saw a YouTube chat poll. I wonder if we are misidentifying morality. What do you mean, Roger?
Hey guys. So like it said, I saw the YouTube chat poll that you guys had concerning. I'm trying to remember exactly how you worded it, but where we get our morality from is that it, as far as theists believing that they get their morality from a god, atheists believing that it's something subjective that, or however people feel that they get their morality from. Is that what the question was? Am I remembering that correctly?
Well, I believe the chat poll question related to, is there a God that establishes morality? Yes or no? And,
okay,
and some,
right.
some why stuff. Yeah.
So, the reason that I called in was because I saw a debate on this a couple years ago. I can't remember exactly who it was, but one of the things that was brought up in the debate has always kind of stuck with me, and it was concerning the subjective or objective nature of morality itself. And that's always stuck with me because I have a real difficulty with seeing morality as something that is entirely subjective, because to me that makes it sound like it can, if it's entirely subjective, then there can be no right or wrong assigned to it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. When you say morality, what do you mean? Whether it's objective or subjective or what? What is it?
So what I saw in the debate was basically, it was between I want to say it was Peter Hitchens, and then there was a young British atheist activist. I can't remember what his name was. But the question had been asked to both of them, and Peter had replied that it was objective because it had come from God. Therefore, there's one set morality, period. It's, here's the book, here's what it says. Whereas his interlocutor came back and said, no, if we all die today, there is no morality tomorrow. It's entirely subjective because it entirely relies on just even human existence for there to be even a sense of morality. And I might be misrepresenting that, but that's kind of what stuck in my head from that.
Well, notice that they're talking about two entirely different things. And this is the really frustrating thing with discussions about morality. Whenever I'm talking to somebody about morality, the first thing I do is ask them to define what they're talking about. Because in my experience, when I'm talking to theists, generally what they're referring to is something like what makes their God happy, or what is pleasing to their God, or what is consistent with their God's nature. Whereas when I tend to talk to secular folks,
what God's rule book is.
Sure. And when I talk to folks in the secular world, they tend to talk more about, what's going to be good for conscious creatures, or what's going to reduce suffering for conscious creatures. What's going to be good for humanity.
Right.
What's good for our planet. So there's a framing issue here. So with theists, what they're talking about is completely divorced from a discussion about what is good or bad for conscious creatures. It's not about suffering. It's not about well-being. Right. It's about their deity, right? So
right.
Under that type of a definition of morality, if God says it's immoral to be gay, then it just is. And whether or not being gay is good or bad for anybody, like, who gives a shit? God said it's bad, so it's bad.
There's no debate on the issue.
Right. But the thing is, when we're talking about subjective versus objective analyses of what it means for something to be moral, if somebody says to me, being gay is immoral because God said so, first of all, there's the whole question of how the fuck do you know what God said? You read it in a book. That's it. That's not good enough for me. But for me, I'm going to go, well, morality, we need to make an assessment with respect to certain goals. So it would, if we could establish that the Bible is the true and accurate word of a God, then it would be accurate to say that, using the theist's definition of morality, we could say, okay, well, yeah, then being gay is immoral. It's against the rule book. But then the question becomes, well, who cares?
Right.
If that's the discussion of morality, then I don't think that we're talking about morality. We're just talking about obedience. I think morality has to be grounded in some assessment of what our goals are. So when we're talking about what's going to be good or bad for people, you know, we can make objective judgments with respect to the goals that we have. We can have a discussion about what do we want our society to look like? What do we want to do with respect to vulnerable populations? You know, should we take care of sick and poor people? You know?
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
And that was kind of my issue with it, was that because the moment I heard the response about it being subjective, and I was like, okay, I can see, you know, I can agree with that statement, but at the same time, you know, as far as cultural norms between two different cultures, like there's things that we allow in our culture that are completely ghastly to other cultures and vice versa. But
yeah,
to say that morality is subjective, what always bothered me about that was to say, well, actually, they're both right. And I'm like, actually, I can prove that guy being gay is not a problem whatsoever. Science has proven that nothing negative has caused that, and nothing negative necessarily has to come from that.
Sure.
And I can actually also scientifically prove that you having a hang up about that guy being gay is a huge problem. And so, like, objectively, I can point to, yes, there is a fact right here that what you're doing is wrong by being such a jerk about this, basically. And that's the thing that's always kind of frustrated me ever since I heard that. And what I kind of developed, I guess, is my definition for morality from that was that morality is basically kind of like our proto-science. It's our first attempt to use any logic, because we have to use that logic in order to help our own society, our own species. You know, we have to use that logic to make the best decision to support our own community. And going back,
what's SDB got to say? I want to hear SDB, because
Well, I think morality in general is a very interesting conversation and very easy to get into the weeds with, because it's just so nebulous. But I think a lot of times we're missing some of the picture, because oftentimes people advocating for objective morality view it as very black and white, of this is good, this is not good. And even I feel like the secular community does a bit better job understanding the gray. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of neglect of the concept that morality can be very contextual. Like, things, even whether or not it's subjective or objective, like there's going to be some context to it, some other, and I bring this up a lot of additional variables that are going to come into the equation. So it's very, very hard to pin down something that's going to be like good in every situation or bad in every situation.
Right.
And something else that I did want to bring up, because in the initial debate that you're referencing, related to morality being around when humans are around and ceasing to exist when humans are gone. But we see similar principles in other animals. We even see altruism in other animals, like the ability for an animal to do something that's not beneficial and directly harmful even to them, for the benefit of another.
Apoptosis, right?
Well, I mean,
basically,
I was thinking. Yeah. Go ahead.
No.
I mean, so with respect to morality, I just don't know how we get around from, you know, people are going to have sort of like a base set of axioms that they use to then derive other principles and goals from, right? So I think that I don't know any way around. We're going to have sort of our base judgments about what we want as conscious creatures, and how do we then get there. And the how do we get there is, I think, the domain of morality. We all care about suffering and well-being to one degree or another. I don't think we can help it. So the question of how do we get closer to some form of well-being, and that's and well-being is an amorphous concept. We're still defining it, and that's a good thing. How do we get closer to good things and away from bad things is what morality is all about. And I don't know how we eliminate minds from that process.
It's difficult to, but even an example here, you have real world examples of cases where people do not have a concept of morality or ethics. So in cases like that,
many of them are in Congress. Hey-yo!
But thinking of people with say like antisocial personality disorders where they don't have a concept of feeling guilt for certain actions and needing to rely on real world consequences, like when you're treating somebody with something like this, oftentimes you have to rely on setting clear boundaries and establishing consequences, because they can understand there are consequences when I do this thing, but they might not feel the effects or understand the effects of their actions on other people. And that's a variation that we see in society. So even taking the mind out of the equation, like it's very difficult to pin down exactly what morality is and where we go from there. So maybe focusing, like Kenneth was saying, focusing on the application of this, and I don't know. It's a confusing question for sure.
Well, no, and that's and that was actually, I think that was kind of where my brain went with it, was that instead of defining morality as objective or subjective, what I kind of came to is that we don't necessarily have morality. We have a theory of morality, and that I don't think it'd be right to call it a theory. We're probably a few steps before that, and we're always going to be there because of the fact that morality is something that always has to develop over time, not just for people, but for just the entire use of it. I mean,
Well, and speaking to what you just said, like, thank goodness morality is subjective. Look at how far we've come. You know, think about things that were accepted commonly as moral, 50 years ago, that we've managed to make some moral progress. Roger, I just looked at the clock and I'm freaking out because there's 2 more calls I got to get to. But I would encourage you to look at what J. Mike says about this stuff. He loves talking about morality. Maybe call back in when he's hosting, and he'll try to bake your noodle with all that anti-realist stuff that he's chewing on.
Sounds fun.
Cool. All right, Roger. Have a good one.
All right. Thank you, guys. You too.
Anytime.